Here are 10 disturbing details from the Arkham games. I'm trying to get 100k this year, so if you can subscribe, it would go a long way and I would really appreciate it. But other than that, let's get started with the first one here. The Riddler has a lot of issues in Batman Arkham Knight. One that I wanted to talk about though was his father issues. So during his boss fight in Batman Arkham Knight, there is a chance that Riddler will say this to Batman during the fight.
Die, father! I mean, Batman!
Now, this is pretty crazy. Why would Riddler say this to Batman? Why does he perceive Batman as his father in any way? Well, this actually ties back to what was established about him all the way in the first game in Batman Arkham Asylum. In that game, Riddler mentions how his father used to physically abuse him and always accuse him of being a cheater when it comes to trying to outsmart everybody. Check out this audio tape.
Taped interview 39. Patient's name is Edward Nigma. At this point in time, I've yet to decide if Mr. Nigma is a suitable candidate for the Titan process. I'd like to talk about your childhood.
Miserable. Next.
By all accounts, that is where your fascination with riddles began. I believe discussing those years could explain your compulsive behavior.
Very well. My father hated me. Always called me a moron.
I see.
I was determined to prove him wrong, so I entered a contest at school. A $20 prize to the kid who could figure out an almost impossible logic problem. I won, of course.
And that pleased your father?
Hardly. He was convinced I had cheated. He kept yelling, "You must have cheated! Admit it, you moron! You cheated!" I swore I didn't, and he hit me for lying.
I'm sorry to hear that, Edward.
Don't be. He was right.
The funny thing is, in the following audio tape, Riddler does actually say that he really did cheat on that game he quote-unquote won. So despite his father being right, it still reveals that Riddler was beat as a child by his dad. And because Batman is constantly beating Riddler and also hurting him, it reminds Riddler of how his father used to treat him, which is why he said that to Batman here. It's kind of sad in a way. I mean, being physically abused by any parent is always a terrible thing. Maybe that's one of the reasons Riddler turned out the way he did. Perhaps if his childhood was healthier, he could have used his gifts for something better. I mean, it's hard to feel any kind of sympathy for Riddler, right, when he does the things he does, but it does give us a more sympathetic approach to him in some fashion, in that he has a somewhat disturbing backstory that never really left him in his adult years. Makes you think what could have been if something had changed, right? It's awesome they kept this detail about him consistent, and one of the reasons Riddler turned out the way he did. So in Batman Arkham Knight, in the Killer Croc DLC, we get exposed to a bigger part of the DC universe in the Arkham world in this mission with the company of Quorum. Now, Quorum in the DC universe is a corrupt secret government agency that's intended to usually create enhanced soldiers or superhumans, metahumans, whatever the case may be. They've created Green Lantern villains in the past, and in Killer Croc's DLC, we see that when we play. We see how they torture their inmates and put them through hell, pretty much. We see Killer Croc get treated like a lab experiment. We can see that he was tortured here by having his skin be put to the test and things of that nature. There is a secret audio tape you can find after the mission that shows that they test on regular people as well, doing crazy things like cutting off limbs. Take a listen to this.
Your introduction began some time ago.
You can't do this! I got raped!
We found food to be an adequate delivery mechanism. 3 square meals a day. By now, the serum has been fully absorbed.
No! Let me go!
More sedative. I don't want a chewed off tongue again. Scalpel.
What are you doing? No! No! Ah! Ah!
Stay awake. That's it. Concentrate.
Oh, God! My finger! You cut off my damn finger!
If the experiment's a success, it'll grow back.
So, in the Arkham universe, they tortured inmates and did crazy things like cut off limbs and try to make them into weapons of war, essentially. It's good Batman sees that, as at the end of the mission, he tells the warden that he's the only monster in sight and that essentially everyone else there is a victim. Batman even tells him to give him the names of everyone he's worked with at Quorum in his cell. It's a disturbing detail because it puts a perspective of like, these criminals are lesser people that should be used as guinea pigs, and the people they're torturing might not even be the worst criminals, right? It could very well be criminals for petty crimes, maybe. And it's also sad for Croc as well, because Killer Croc has been treated as a monster his whole life, and nobody has ever saw past that except for Batman. It really is sad for him, and shows how corrupt some of these companies in the DC world really are. So, Hugo Strange in Arkham City, we see him as this extremely intelligent, sophisticated, meticulous villain that also has the knowledge of knowing who Batman is. However, something that's common with a lot of Batman villains is that they're obsessed with Batman, and Hugo is no exception. In fact, his obsession is arguably way creepier than most other villains. The reason for that is that Hugo Strange has his own Batman costume hidden away that he puts on and pretends to be Batman with. It's a thing in the comics where he puts it on just to feel something. It's very weird, and it puts in the perspective of like, okay, on the outside Hugo seems to be the scary villain, but deep down, the dude's kind of a weirdo and a creep. In the Arkham universe, he pretty much has that same trait from the comics. Riddler mentions it in an audio tape with him. Check this out.
Good evening, Hugo. I believe it is time for our one-on-one.
No. It is time for you to stop this and give up. My tiger guards will find you, and when that happens, I will perform the procedure on you myself.
Procedure? Oh, you mean what you did to all those poor fools back at the asylum. To be honest, I think you did them a favor.
How do
I know that you requested access to all the most forgettable patients and proceeded to melt their brains with the help of that confused milliner? Or did you mean, how do I know that you have been providing the ex-warden with your own special medication? No doubt intended to render his synapses more malleable to your suggestions. Or maybe you are currently wondering if I know about the secret panel in your closet. How it slides back to reveal what you want most. How you sit, wearing that suit, crying into your hands as you question whether you are really worthy.
What do you want, Mr. Nigma?
Oh, that's easy. I want exactly what you want.
And what's that?
Batman, dead. Humiliated, but dead.
Hugo has a secret area where he hides his Batman costume to put on and be a creep with. It's one thing for someone like Jonah Jameson to do with a Spider-Man costume, right? But for someone like Hugo Strange, it feels weird with his character. How Riddler knows that, I don't know. But nonetheless, it gives you a different perspective on Hugo Strange. We always knew he was interested in Batman, but his obsession is on a really creepy level. I always include a Calendar Man story here because of how insane and monstrous this guy is, and he has a bunch of creepy stories. One that really stood out to me was his disturbing Valentine's Day story. Take a listen.
Valentine's Day. Hearts and flowers. The perfect occasion to smother my new love with tokens of affection. I chose a dozen red roses, an assortment of truffles, and a darling little lacy thing. Oh, excuse me. I didn't mean to be so intimate. You might say I'd overdone it. And in truth, at that point, my love and I had not actually met. Ever the romantic, I followed her to her apartment. Loudly proclaiming my love, I drowned out her screams of protest. Sadly, it was not to be. So instead of smothering her with gifts, I simply smothered her.
I mean, what needs to be said? He stalked a woman he was, I guess, attracted to, broke into her home, and drowned out her screams by screaming his love for her instead, and at the end just killed her. The craziest part is, this might be one of the more tame crimes this guy has done. One of my other videos here discuss how he murdered his parents. Some of the other stories are even crazier than that, but what makes Calendar Man even creepier, and why I put this one here specifically, is that his crimes are more realistic in a sense compared to other Batman villains. Calendar Man has a gimmick, yes, with holidays and whatnot, but this kind of crime here has happened many times in real life, right? He's not a clown prince of crime, he's not a giant crocodile, he's just a monster dressed as a human being. Him being a stalker is one of the many on the list of the horrendous monstrous attributes he has made for himself. Calendar Man is a darker, realistic spot in the Arkham world, which makes him that much creepier in my opinion. Dollotrons, the mindless drones that Professor Pig created that do whatever he says. In my opinion, a fate worse than death, like Batman describes it. I'd rather honestly be dead than a Dollotron, as the victims can still understand what's happening around them but can't do anything. It's terrifying. However, I wanted to touch on an element of them in the game. Whatever ends up happening to them. So once you beat the mission, the Dollotrons are inside a cell at GCPD. However, if you go back to visit them after the mission, they all vanish. Now, I think this is just a glitch in the game or something, because sometimes they're still there and sometimes they're not. I don't know, honestly. But I wanted to touch on it still and figure out what does the GCPD do with the victims that turn into Dollotrons, because there has to be a canon reason as to what happens to them after the events of Batman Arkham Knight, right? There were theories that people brought up on what exactly happens to them. The thing is, I don't think you can fix these people that turn into Dollotrons. They had their genitals cut off, their skin cut like they're all the same in this scary way. It's very sad. So some people think that the GCPD had them put out of their misery, maybe giving them a mercy death, which honestly I think might be too far, as the GCPD shouldn't be able to make a choice like that, but I guess it's an option. Another thing is that maybe they were taken to some lab, like maybe Star Labs, and see if anything can be recovered for these victims. There's no way to know for sure, but no matter how you see it, it's just extremely disturbing. You can't fix them anymore, not really. I personally, I don't know, I wouldn't want to live like that, you know? They really highlight this too with the people that were lucky enough to not turn into them after the pig mission, as they all cry and they have serious trauma that they probably won't ever recover from. It's a very scary thought, but what do you think happens to the Dollotrons? I'm actually curious. Let me know. One recurring theme in Batman Arkham Knight is Batman and his allies, and how the Joker has ruined their lives in some shape or form. This detail is one I wanted to put here because I find it pretty interesting. Listen to what Joker says to Batman after he kills Jason Todd here.
His name. Tell me.
Of course, sir. It's...
Never could stand a tattletale. That's why I like to work alone. No one to spoil the punchline. You should try it sometime. After all, you've seen what happens when you drag your friends into this crazy little game of ours.
Drag your friend into this crazy little game of ours. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it's because Batman hallucinates about this line previously during the Killing Joke segment, in which Barbara gets shot by Joker as well. On the wall here, the same exact line is said. So to me, this shows that Batman may constantly think about this line and how he blames himself for his allies getting hurt. And it also shows that Joker's words do get to Batman and that he has nightmares about them. I don't know. I find this really interesting because it gives us a deeper look between Batman and Joker, and why Arkham Batman in particular is so bent on keeping his allies away from the major threat to Gotham, because he's seen what happens to them if he doesn't do that. Even though Oracle and Jason were in no way his fault in my opinion, he still blames himself, and I think that's a disturbing detail worth noting. And I like how this one line is echoed in not these two scenes, but for the rest of the game. Presents a really ominous feeling about the relationship between Batman and Joker that I really like. Harley Quinn in the Arkham games is one of the most evil versions of the character. There seems to be no saving grace for her, and she really has no redeeming qualities. However, there is one instance in the games that I used to overlook, where it seems that she still has some sense of good in her. In Harley's DLC in Arkham Knight, there are quite a few voice lines from Harleen Quinzel inside Harley's mind, trying to tell her that what she's doing is wrong and that she should stop. There's a bunch, so just listen to some of these.
You're attacking men of the law.
Impressive, isn't it?
Is there any way I can convince you to stop the madness?
Sorry, Harleen. It's the only thing keeping me sane!
This has gone far enough.
Not really.
Harley, can we stop now?
Quit nagging!
Did you even think this through?
Quiet! I need to concentrate!
Don't do this, Harley.
Watch me!
You know, Harley.
Ha! You have no friends!
There are more lines, but you get the gist of it. And also, on the walls throughout the DLC, there's writings on the walls that I can't really make out, but it depicts her insanity. As far as I know, this is the only bit from the games where it shows that Harley has something in her head telling her that what she's doing is wrong, but by her responses, she doesn't care and ignores them. It's pretty insane. Harley in the Arkham games is straight evil. Like, she doesn't care. Like, she aids in killing kids with the Joker. Crazy stuff. These voice lines really highlight her insanity though, and show that she could be brought back and be a better person if she were to somehow listen to these voices inside her head, but Harley Quinn may be too far gone at this point. Just goes to show how insane Harley is in the Arkhamverse. Scarecrow in the Arkham games has always been a creepy spot, and while we do see how insane and dangerous he can be, especially in Arkham Asylum and Arkham Knight, his origins that we get a glimpse of in Batman Arkham Origins adds a little bit more of a sinister twist to the character. In Arkham Origins, in the first mission at Blackgate, if you go into this room here, you can see a clipboard of a list of visitors at Blackgate, one of which is Jonathan Crane, who, interestingly enough, never checked out as you can see here, so it's presumed that he is still in the building during this entire riot. Interesting, Jonathan Crane is a monster, so you may enjoy the chaos that's ensuing. Perhaps he's getting a closer look at all the villains and enemies in Blackgate? I don't know. I can't see him being scared of the chaos though, right? Trying to imagine what he's doing during this riot is something I want to know more about. Maybe he's trying to study who's afraid and who's not. Who knows? Something to also note though here is that he visits a lot. I mean, look at the amount of times his name is on here, as if he's trying to study what makes his inmates tick and to how to expose that maybe. It's crazy stuff. And that's not it. Something else with Jonathan Crane that's a little more eerie is that over in the final offer ship, you can see that he has a flyer showing that he is looking for participants in a clinical research study. The thing here is that he is looking for people who may be sad or depressed or suffer mental disorders. This is sad because you know he's going to be testing his fear toxin on these already depressed or mentally unstable people, rooting their lives even more or even killing them. It's kind of creepy because we know this is alluding to his eventual transformation into Scarecrow, and it shows that even back then he didn't care about people's well-being and instead wants to test on them. This links back with his many visits in Blackgate where he was maybe studying them to help create a toxin on how to affect weaker minds maybe? I don't know. There's a lot of ambiguity there, but I think the ambiguity is what makes this all the more disturbing when you know just how much of a monster Jonathan Crane truly is and how he sees all these people in unfortunate situations as guinea pigs essentially. Somebody that I wanted to talk about was Clayface. What happened to Clayface after Arkham City? So at the end of Arkham City, Batman beats Clayface, and Clayface slides into the Lazarus Pit, where after that, we never hear of him. This has people thinking that he maybe died, but that isn't the case. Although we never hear about him, he was originally supposed to appear in Batman Arkham Knight at Panera Studios. There's concept art of him at Panera, and also there's a secret room on the side of Panera Bread Studios that people suspect might have been his hideout, so to speak. There's even orange paint here that looks like clay from Clayface. However, here's a disturbing part of this whole thing. So according to the game's wiki page, and I believe this is from the comics, although I'm not too sure, Clayface's dry mud was collected by GCPD after Arkham City shut down, and apparently Clayface is still alive within the mud collected by GCPD, but he is unable to take form again because of the Lazarus particles mixed with his mud and the explosion from the generator. Now this is kind of disturbing, right? Imagine being Clayface and not being able to get out of your clay form. You can't become normal and you're just stuck inside a mud ball, fully aware of everything but just not being able to get out. It's a horrible fate, one that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. And the fact that Clayface is not once mentioned in Arkham Knight kinda leads me to believe that this may be his fate, because otherwise we have heard about him, right? The comics being canon or not is always up in the air, but sometimes there are things it tells us that the games never do, this being one of them. Despite Clayface being a villain, I'd say that his fate here is something that he didn't deserve, and his fate is something that's way worse than even death in my opinion. Disturbing detail and a sad day for the shape-shifting villain. Now this disturbing detail isn't more so a detail in the Arkham games, but more so a lack thereof, so to speak, but I wanted to touch on it. One of the creepiest villains in Batman's Rogues Gallery, arguably more than people like Professor Pig or Calendar Man, is the Dollmaker. The Dollmaker is an incredibly creepy villain that's kind of like Professor Pig. He tortures humans and turns them into little dolls for him to control. The creepier part is that it's not only adults, but primarily children that he tortures and turns into monsters. There's multiple people that take on the role of Dollmaker, and there's two that I wanted to talk about specifically because they kind of have a sort of link to the Arkham games. To start, in Catwoman's DLC in Arkham Knight, she's in the Winslow's toy shop. Winslow Schott is a villain called the Toyman, but his son is Anton Schott, and Anton is the Dollmaker. Anton was driven by abandonment issues. His mom abandoned him in Metropolis because she thought he was a pedophile, leaving him to fend for himself. He found his dad's old shop one day and started kidnapping children and turning them into cybernetic doll-like slaves. So this shop here could allude to the fact that Dollmaker may exist. However, this Dollmaker I talked about is more so a Supergirl villain and not more so a Batman villain. But this leads into the next Dollmaker I wanted to talk about, Barton Mathis. Barton Mathis is the third Dollmaker in the whole grand scheme of things, and he's usually depicted as a Batman villain. He's never mentioned in the Arkham games, and this Dollmaker is scarier, in my opinion. Barton's childhood is very disturbing. As a kid, he would watch his dad murder people and then eat them. His dad was a cannibal. Eventually, his dad was shot and killed by a young James Gordon, which Barton saw as a kid. He then spent a year in foster care, but then vanished without a trace, and came back to Gotham as the Dollmaker. His version of Dollmaker was more like a Leatherface. He was a serial killer who created dolls out of the skins and limbs of his victims. And not only that, he wore the skin of his dead father. I bring this up because even though he's never mentioned in the Arkham games, Barton Mathis saw the Toyman as a father figure, which somewhat ties to what we see here in Catwoman's DLC. So maybe, just maybe, Barton Mathis does exist in this world. He's an incredibly disturbing villain, one of the more disturbing villains in Batman's Rogues Gallery for sure. Barton tortures kids and adults, but it's usually depicted as kids, which is the crazy part. He's a very disturbing villain who honestly I think might be creepier than Professor Pig. Now, he's never mentioned in the Arkham games, and maybe he never was because it might have been redundant with other serial killer villains, right, like Professor Pig and Victor Zsasz, because in some shape or form, they are kind of identical. But the Dollmaker is one of the more downright monstrous people in Batman's Rogues Gallery. He's Batman's own Leatherface villain, so to speak. And who knows, I put him in this video because I would like to see him in a game one day, because as far as horror goes, the Dollmaker is one of the darkest spots in the Batman universe when executed correctly. If you watch the Batman vs. Robin animated movie, the Dollmaker does appear in that movie, and he does what I just described. He tortures kids, and you can see that in the movie, and it's pretty sad and pretty creepy.
You're safe now. I swear to you. You're safe.
Maybe one day we'll see the Dollmaker in an Arkham game or a Batman game. It would be interesting. And those are 10 disturbing details in the Arkham games. Let me know what you think of this selection, if I got anything wrong, and what your favorite one was. And don't worry, there'll be another disturbing details video in like 4 months, maybe a year. I don't know, whenever I feel like it. But please subscribe. I'm trying to reach 100k this year. Sharing the video in any way helps. Leave a like. Call me handsome in the comments. That makes my day. And I really appreciate every single one of you. Thank you all, and any support in the video is really appreciated, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay safe, and peace.